and welcome back to the Warzone. I'm your host, Dr. John Hammer, and today we have a special guest. Ladies and gentlemen, Tricky Youth.
I am Tricky.
Hey, how you doing, Tricky?
Well, as we were briefly touching on before we went live on the air, I'm living another day in beautiful Los Angeles, which is currently on fire because of a response to injustice and people, deciding to not be complicit in human rights violations in a fascist government that has decided to override a democratically elected distinction as a sanctuary city that Los Angeles has decided to be. And so the residents of Los Angeles have decided to push back against ICE and the Trump administration as well en masse, and it's been very inspiring to see. And so it's a very interesting time in Los Angeles right now, as I'm sure you've seen in, media coverage and maybe, people on the ground out here of what's going on. But, it's very interesting and very inspiring because there has been a lot of hopelessness and powerlessness sort of permeating, I think, what a lot of people feel. And that has shifted over the last couple of weeks because we are seeing people reject something that they see as unjust and and it's a specific goal too of pushing this agency that should not exist out of our city where it should be. So, my life 2 weeks ago and the art that I was creating 2 weeks ago and where things are at now, they're very intertwined because, as I was also saying to you before we went live, I'm a big believer in, letting things be what they are instead of trying to shape them into what I think reality should be like this or life should be like this, and instead trying to understand it and work with it, including understanding injustices and figuring out, okay, what would I like to do about them? So
Right.
That's a very recent development, which is funny because it's a little different than the conversation we had probably 2 weeks ago via text when we were introduced.
Yeah, but it's perfect. It's authentic. It's real, and I really appreciate your honesty and your perspective because I'm up, in the redwoods. I don't really see it. I see some. We have some of the protests here, but maybe not on the level of Los Angeles. And then you also have the element of the provocateurs, kind of the people on the payroll going in there and causing chaos. So they just have the order out of chaos, sweep it under the rug, get them out of there. So a lot of people don't question or think. But, since we're already on this subject, and you're saying how basically everything in the world has its place. What about some of these, I don't know, I don't want to seem dehumanizing or anything like that, but the people that are shouting, ship them back, and kind of like, they have the mindset that like some of these people are like the wrong Amazon package they received, and it's like send them back. Like, what do you think? What is going on with those people? Why are they so insensitive? What's with the apathy? What's with the lack of compassion? Is it just programming, brainwashing, generational trauma? What do you think that's all about?
Well, I think that it's a tough question to answer because I don't really I have trouble with the concept of those people.
Me too. Yeah, and I'm related to some of them, and it's an interesting dynamic. I'm not going to argue with anybody, but me presenting my opinion to theirs, it's kind of like the totally authoritarian, iron-fisted kind of brainwash, and if that was to happen to them, they'd be singing a different tune.
100%, and I think that's what I mean is I have I struggle with the concept of those people, like any sort of group of those people, because if I look at a group of those people,
yeah,
the answer to your question is different on an individual basis for each one of them, and maybe that's me practicing a little too much empathy in this situation but like I guarantee you that each one of them arrived at that point in a different way, maybe similar, but for some of them it's conditioning, for some of them it's fear, for some of them it's something that happened to them that influenced it, for some of them it's media poisoning, for some of them it's it really depends, and I think that when I think it sort of takes away to look at these people as a monolith. You know, if you look at these like racist right wingers and say, well, they all feel the same way, they all arrived at this the same way. I think if we want to try and deconstruct their beliefs with them and walk them to somewhere else, and maybe help them to see, like you were saying, that this is not right. I don't think that there's one blueprint. I think it really is, as tedious as it sounds, it's individual work, and it's empathy and compassion based work of like trying to, in the ways that we can, sit with people and talk with them, and in whatever that looks like. That could look like literally sitting next to someone, that could look like talking to someone on the internet, but just connecting with them as human beings. Of course, there's when things get out into the streets, a little bit different, but yeah, I mean, it's trying to understand. I think that goes back to the sort of the first thing I was saying, which is that I don't like to live. I can't live, but I don't believe in living in some sort of alternate reality fantasy, what I believe things should be in my head. I would rather understanding what is, which is something that really is one of the core beliefs of my art and my work, is not, well, let me live in a fantasy land where things are like this. It's, well, no, let me try to understand what is. Artistically, spiritually, that's where I come from, and let me try to engage with what is, because that's often the most difficult part. And sometimes engaging with what is in these senses means trying to understand how someone arrived at a point that we feel is just completely incomprehensible and like just heinous.
Yes, yeah. And since transitioning a little bit into your art, what I've seen, what you're doing, man, it's very, very interesting, very creative, breaking a lot of boundaries, smashing sigils. Can you tell us about your artistic journey? What led you into this intense blend of performance, pain, and prayer?
Well, one of my biggest early influences in terms of my art was seeing street preachers when I was growing up in New York City. Growing up in New York City, seeing street preachers out on the corners with, a little speaker and a microphone, just ranting and raving of God, and seeing that was one of my biggest early artistic influences, because it carried a desperation and a fear that resonated with me in a way that other art about God did not. So, seeing these street preachers, on the corners, ranting and raving, vein popping out of their neck, eyes bulging out of their head, just, what it is, like talking a million miles a minute on these, speakers that had delay on them for some reason and reverb on them, and just like the ranting and raving and sweating and waving pamphlets around on the street corners. And that, to me, growing up, seeing, art that was about God or related to God, or Christian rock or things like that, all to me felt very disingenuous and very surface level.
Right.
But seeing very guttural, manic energy, I came to believe that if one is to make art about God, it has to carry, this element of desperation and this element of fear, because that's honest. That's what we honestly feel in most moments when we think about God. Yes, there's gratitude. Yes, there's wonder, awe, amazement. But a lot of what we feel is desperation, which is neither good nor bad, but desperation, and then fear. And fear is neither good nor bad either. It's just a feeling. It's just an emotion. Just, I am afraid. And what are you afraid of? And how does the fear influence, your next action? And so from very early on, watching street preachers in New York City, I wanted to adopt that into the way that I made art and the way that I attuned myself to God, because there's almost a speaking in tongues element to it, where at a certain point it doesn't even feel like, there's English or any other linguistic words. It's just like ranting, and it becomes almost speaking in tongues. And so that sort of influenced my what I wanted to do in terms of performance. So the first solo art that I made, I actually took a little speaker with a microphone plugged into it, and made it into essentially a chain I would wear around my neck. And I took it out on the streets of New York City, and I would do these street performances where I would similarly sort of just as it came to me, go into poetry and sometimes rants and sometimes song out on the streets of New York City and in the subways, and just do these very, free form, long form performances. And then that graduated to doing performances in various spaces where I would invite people to, hey, I'm going to do a performance in this abandoned building. I'm going to do a performance in front of this space, and people would come out. And then, a lot of those performances were ruminations on fear, acceptance, desperation, and a search for the divine. And then that led me to my friend Soren Roy, an electronic musician in New York, who took an interest in what I was doing and wanted to collaborate with me by, also doing, a generator-powered modular electronic setup that would back up some of my, rants and spoken word performances. And so we started a project called Public Hymns, where we would show up in front of churches around New York City and hand out pamphlets that I've made and do these, ambient, modular electronic and spoken word performances, and then move to another church, and we would tell people where we would be, and we would live stream it. And then we did that project, and then eventually took that on the road and did a tour where we, it was just full of entropy and acceptance, where we were just traveling around the country and doing these street performances in front of lighthouses and on, on the streets and, in parking lots, sort of just carrying the word of God, which is, to me, in everything. And so that was, sort of the origins of that's sort of the origins of what I do now is these, sermons and street performances.
Fantastic. I love it. So that kind of leads into my next question. I think you already answered it. The process of writing the prayer, Lord, please keep me safe. Promise I will never stray. And also, that also leads into what you mean by devotion in your context of your arts. These street performances, getting tattooed live on stage across cities, it's very, very powerful stuff. To me, it's practical magic. And you use your body as both medium and a message. How has this affected your relationship with pain, vulnerability, and spirituality? Was there a turning point where you decided you had to go all in physically?
Yes. It was a very conscious decision that I wanted to use my body as an object of devotion, and to use my body to explore divinity in every moment and in our world. I am, my view of pantheism is aligned with Spinoza's, and it's one that sort of rejects the idea of a specific personal God based on our projections, our fears, our insecurities, and instead embracing all as God, meaning, everything around you is God. God is not a thing. God is in everything,
Yes.
which leads to radical acceptance and the concept of immanence. But it also means to accept that both the sacred and profane are both God, and that, chastity and deviancy are both God, and coming to terms with these things being equal instead of, worshiping one over another, or deciding we as people know what is good, what is bad, what God's will is, rather than just following it because it's around us. It's the ultimate surrender. It's a rejection of the human arrogance that we could have any specific idea of what God is, instead of just, opening our eyes and looking around us. I'm a big believer in the in William Blake's "For everything that lives is holy." It's something that I live by, where if you want to connect with God, just open your eyes. And so, Spinoza calls it to participate in eternal totality, and I call these degradation hymns, because to connect with the things that we find to be degrading, to connect with the things that we are afraid of, is to connect with God, and to use our bodies to show our devotion. I believe is one of the highest forms of doing so, because that is engaging with, what we believe to be the mundane nature of the world, just our body, and I when I went on that tour to get that tattoo put on me by my friend Zero, at each show, the idea was, I want to let the road leave its mark on me. I don't want to, carry this like egotistic idea of like, I'm going to leave my mark on the road. Everywhere I go, I'm going to plant my flag. I believe it's really the opposite. And the
Yeah.
more we make the implicit explicit, I think the more we see that, where the road really leaves its mark on me. And each one of these shows left its mark on me. And inevitably it will, but in this case, it was just a ritual to make the implicit explicit, and to make a very simple ask. Because I do believe that oftentimes we think of prayer as this little letter writing where, hey, we can influence, I can influence what God's will is if I send up this little letter, and I'm so arrogant to believe that God is going to bend to my will, which is
Right.
wild. But Lord, please keep me safe, promise I will never stray, is just an ask. And that ask may or may not be answered in the way that I want, and I have to accept whatever happens. And so in the performance pieces, one of the reasons why I started to introduce things like bloodletting, like, this element of pain, this element of danger, was to sort of throw myself into the unknown, and to say, well, I don't know what's going to happen. I have to be in acceptance of whatever's going to happen. Me and the audience are experiencing this together, and honestly, neither one of us knows what's going to happen here or how this is going to go. There may be times where I have bled too much and lost a lot of blood, and that's the performance. It's not, oh, it didn't go according to plan. Everything at every moment is going according to plan.
Right.
It's
Yes.
just not, you know.
Yes. That's very interesting. And also, in my magical rituals and rites, I know offering blood is one of the most sacred things you can do for the gods. And then also with the tattoos, I was wondering, how do you view your tattoos now, post tour? Do they still burn with that same meaning?
I, it's funny because, and in just speaking in very, very vague generalities here, for somewhat obvious reasons, I had to sort of tap into that prayer yesterday. I literally clasped my hands and said that prayer yesterday. Um, I said, Lord, please keep me safe, promise I will never stray. Because there was a moment where I felt I needed it. And so, I think, similarly to scars, they almost, the meaning of them sort of calcifies over time and grows. When they're new, and when the prayer was new, it represented one thing. But now, that tour was in the spring of 2023. So, it's almost 2.5 years on, it has come to mean so many things. And I think it's similar to when we revisit prayers throughout our lives. They take on new meanings. When we revisit scripture throughout our lives, it takes on new meanings. When we revisit events throughout our lives, it takes on new meaning. So, it burns brighter than ever, because the more we revisit these things, the more context gets added on to them, the more new insights get added on to them, I believe.
Yes, very true. And I was wondering about the American degradation hymns. Do you see these as modern rituals? And are you reclaiming something ancient through this pain and repetition?
Yeah, I mean, I think that going back to the street preacher influence and just sort of connecting with that desperation to connect with and become the divine, and to have all of our fears alleviated and our questions answered, and it manifesting in this sort of manic energy. I'm also very influenced by the ugliness that can happen from the drive to reach our divine potential instant. And I when I look at works like Ballard's Crash, or William S. Burroughs, a lot of them to me are dealing with humanity wanting to touch God by seeking out more, 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 more. And so we end up degrading ourselves through, whatever it is, through pain, through, drugs, through, whatever, sex, whatever we find our addiction, our vice to be, to push ourselves further, to reach oblivion. And, exploring that and exploring the various ways that we degrade ourselves in the search for divinity to touch God has been one of the major themes of my work. How ugly and warped we become when we're in hot pursuit of that more, 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 and trying to, not just touch God, but become God. Because if we become God, then we're in control. And the fear that many of us carry is that we are not in control. And so that's why we create these gods. That's why we create gods that are based on personal projections and insecurities and fears, because we can't deal with this idea that it is so outside of anything that we can understand, or that we can control or create or influence. And so, I love exploring the various ways, especially, the word American in front of the degradation hymns. I love exploring the various ways that we degrade ourselves in the search of divinity, in this desperate search that is just so raw and guttural, to try and transcend our humanity and touch something higher and become God.
Fascinating. Yeah, it just makes me think. Sometimes the closest you can be to God is rock bottom, and a lot of times you think you're getting distance from God, or like it's almost like the opposite of a rainbow. The closer you try to get to a rainbow, the further it appears. But it seems like with God, the further away you get, the closer you become. But I digress. Please talk to me about your collaboration some more in depth with Zero and Soren Roy. What is it like creating such raw work with others? Any musical, literary, or esoteric influences you want to shout out?
Well, I mean, it's, you know, with collaboration with what I do, it involves a lot of trust. So there's a lot of, you know, with my collaborators, there's a lot of me sort of laying out, here's what I'm looking to explore. And if you're not comfortable with that, that's okay with me, but that may mean that we are not able to collaborate. And so I have a lot of gratitude towards everyone that I've collaborated with, over the last 10 years, because they've all willingly agreed to go on this ride with me that at sometimes can be completely wild and uncertain. The tour that I did around the country with Soren Roy was in 2017. And I mean, there were moments where I was like, okay, we're gonna do this. We're doing this street performance tour where there's no load-in times, there's no venues. We're just gonna pull up. We're gonna tell people what city we're gonna be in. We're gonna pull up to that city. We're gonna perform. And there was times where I would kind of look over my shoulder because I never want to drag anyone into my madness and not check in on, hey, is everything still going okay with you? Or are you okay with this? And every time I would check over my shoulder, he'd be right there, kind of just ready and willing and still in for the ride. And the same thing with Zero. Zero, actually, the first time that she tattooed me was at the Gathering of the Juggalos, the Insane Clown Posse's festival, which I performed at in 2022. And I had this idea of getting tattooed on stage while I performed. And I didn't even know her. We met through our mutual friend Tara in Pittsburgh. And I met her at the Gathering of the Juggalos, and I laid it out for her. I was like, hey, let me know if this is too much, or, what you think about this. But, I would love for you to come up on stage and tattoo me during my performance and sort of do this, beautiful ritual together. And she, once again, was just absolutely ready and willing and very attuned to the mission and understood it. And then after we did that, I said, hey, what if we did a whole tour of this where I put together this prayer and you tattoo it on me? And again, she didn't shy away from any of it. She was like, okay, yeah, this is what we're doing. So in collaboration with other artists, or, a collaboration of any kind, even just in my personal life, I think that I have to really lay out for the other party or parties, okay, here's what you're agreeing to. It's gonna be kind of fucking crazy. So if you're not okay with that, I'm fine with that, but you gotta let me know, because then we can't proceed. As far as influences go, I back to what I was saying about, we talked a little bit about Spinoza, and Spinoza talks about understanding and connecting to what is as a way to connect with God and to surrender to what is and work with it. And this idea of participating in eternal totality. And to me, when I think about that in regards to, noise and rock and roll, that's in the entropy of noise. That's in rock and roll. If you look at someone that's totally attuned, like one of my biggest influences, which is Jimi Hendrix.
Yeah.
It's so sloppy, it's so messy, it's so beautiful, and it's also just like, it's exactly what it should be. There's no, when you listen to and I'm not even just talking about a Jimi Hendrix, live performance. I mean, if you listen to Are You Experienced, and you listen to Axis, and you listen to Electric Ladyland, there's so much tape hiss on those records. There's so much, like, they're well produced, but they're well produced in that they are what they are, not in that they're supposed to be these pristine recordings. But then you hear stories about Jimi Hendrix's live performances, and if he felt like, okay, this is not, my gear's not working, I'm melting down, I'm just gonna mess around with feedback for a while, that's what the performance was, and he was comfortable with that. And everybody who was there, if they were really attuned to what was going on, they could understand, okay, I am seeing something I'm never going to see again. This is special, as opposed to like, oh, he's playing the hits. You know what I mean? And that's what really led me. I love rock and roll, and it's obviously, I am a rocker at heart. And I play a Jackson Flying V
Nice.
through Ampeg by 10 and an Orange Crush Pro amp, and a lot of my music is guitar based, but like that's what led me to noise.
Yeah.
Is this entropy and this idea of just completely deconstructing it, and and letting things be what they are, and letting things get out of control, because that is when I feel the most attuned to God, is when I let go and I surrender. And noise, even when it is very practiced, even when it is very calculated, involves some element of surrender, because your your contact mic decides to do something that you did not intend for it to do, or your pedal decides to do something that you did not intend for it to do. That's not a bad thing. That's when you're breaking through. That's when you're really touching the divine, to me.
Very fascinating, yeah. And I like what you said about Jimi Hendrix as a noise artist. That was
Oh yeah.
never in my mind, but now I totally see it. And it's also fascinating that I was living in Washington at the beginning of the year, and I found myself at Jimi Hendrix's grave. Actually,
Yes.
it's a big monument, but just
Yep.
being there, feeling his magic, feeling his presence, he was tapping into something that was far beyond rock and roll, and just even far beyond noise, and very, very, very profound.
Isn't it crazy? I went there for the first time in December of last year when I was on tour. I was playing in Seattle um, with my friend Peopling, who incredible, noise artist, and my friends 9 to 5 Hyperfuck, who are an incredible, noise act, and me and Amber and Louie from 9 to 5 Hyperfuck, uh, we decided to go to Jimi Hendrix's grave, and I'd never been. And a big theme of that tour, you know, it was a tour all through the U.S. It was like a 5-week, 25-date tour. That a big theme of it was I was thinking about Jimi Hendrix the whole time. You could. I mean, it's kind of funny. Like you can ask anyone that was on that tour with me, because there was 6 different legs and 8 different people. Like, I did not stop talking about Jimi Hendrix the entire time. I was so singularly minded on, what would Jimmy do in this case, and it was, and then it just so happened the very last stop on the tour was in Seattle, and we went to Jimi Hendrix's grave, and it was, the energy there is something else.
Oh yeah.
It was funny because, we left some stuff there, and this is going to sound like this next thing that I'm about to say, full disclosure, this is going to sound a little bit like when I don't know if you've ever seen to me, maybe this is my insecurity speaking. It's going to sound a little bit like that clip of Glenn Danzig where he's by his bookshelf and he's like, yeah, this is werewolves of the SS, all documented, all true, or whatever. And it's just like,
I've never
like
seen that. I've never seen it.
I'm not trying to like spin some lore here or whatever, but I was like, all right, I would love to get one last moment with Jimmy. And I turn around and there's this coyote standing there that was not there a moment before. And the coyote is just staring me down, like Tom Cruise in Collateral. But like, I'm looking at this coyote that's just standing there. And I was like, oh, I actually have to go. Like, I don't get another moment with Jimmy because this coyote is telling me like, it's time to go,
Right.
and it just this sudden appearance, and I could feel, I don't know, again, I don't believe in ascribing meanings to things that are beyond, the world around us. So I'm not going to say, oh, that coyote was Jimi Hendrix. I don't know what that all I know is that was a coyote that appeared from out of nowhere at a very very, very specific moment in that experience that felt very charged and very potent. That's all I know. I can draw my conclusions from that. I think that, one of my greatest teachers loved to say, things don't happen for a reason, things happen and then we decide what the reason is. And so, again, I felt something, and I'm not saying, oh, I know what that coyote was, but that coyote just appeared and was standing there, and I was like, I got to turn around and go. I get in my car, I turn the car on to leave, and it's on Voodoo Child, and it's the part where Jimi Hendrix says, if I don't meet you no more in this world, I'll meet you in the next one, and don't be late.
Whoa.
So there's So there's these spiritual properties to what this person was doing, and if you there are interviews with loved ones of Jimi Hendrix's where they talk about how he believed he had demons inside of him, and he even tried to get them exorcised at different points in his life because he felt that he was possessed by a demon. And oftentimes for people who are very charged and full of this spiritual energy that they are sort of whether they want to be or not, they become an open channel to transmit it. It can feel like possession, and I go back to thinking about those street preachers. I go back to thinking about, seeing people speaking in tongues. I go back to thinking about, all of that. But I then think about these beautiful moments of, earthly divinity, like Jimi Hendrix playing Machine Gun and just finding like these sounds that it seemed like they were really coming from God. And so in the best noise sets I've seen touch that. The best noise sets I've seen go somewhere where afterwards it's hard to describe. And if you watch a video of it or you listen to a recording of it, it's not the same as being in the room for it. And I feel the same about, good performance art.
Well, that's very cool, man. And I gotta tell you though, I've had a similar experience recently. It was recently the anniversary of Stib Bader's death, and I was doing rituals channeling him, and then immediately after I saw two bears, and I know that was him. I don't have any problem saying that, and if someone thinks I'm crazy, I think the people that don't see these things, don't have these connections, are the really ones that are missing out and crazy. But yes, Jimi Hendrix, that great, very powerful, that serendipitous moment where he was speaking to you, I believe that was him. That's how that's how it works here, and that's just the way I think, my mindset, and to each their own. But you've also mentioned on your tours, you didn't know how each night would go. There's an element of chaos, uncertainty. Why is uncertainty so important to your performances? Do you see your work as a mirror of America's instability at all?
Yeah, I think naturally, just me being a product of growing up in America, it is. I don't even think I have a choice in that. I think I'm a product. I think I'm a reflection of America's instability. You know what I mean? I don't even.
Yeah.
I think that, and that's another belief that I have, is that our artistic practices, they are all practices, but our big work of art is our lives, and so you know our lives being our real true work of art, we are creating in every moment. And so, I think that I myself, whether I want to be or not, and I am a reflection of America's instability because, growing up in the 1990s and seeing all of the turbulence, and then, living through 9/11 and watching it happen from across the water. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, and just watched it happen in school, and all these things, like post Columbine, and then going into the Bush years, and
Yeah.
experiencing, all everything that has followed since then, the rise of the alt-right, the huge divisiveness in America, looming civil war, 2020 happening, this moment right now, I think, and also growing up, raised on media, like very, very television-based upbringing, which has worked its way into my performances. I think that whether I intend to be or not, I am a reflection of the instability of America because I, was born and raised here and live here now. And I think that the art that I create is a reflection of that. As far as the unpredictability and the chaos, that is because I need to incorporate that surrender into my artistic practices in every moment. Otherwise, it does not feel alive. And so for me, what surrendering looks like is accepting that whatever happens is what's meant to happen, and let's understand it and work with it and live within it and engage with it rather than struggling against it. I think as many artists are, when I was younger, I was very, things have to look like this, things have to be like this, and
Yeah.
oh, that was a bad set because it didn't go the way that this was supposed to, or that song, I don't like the way that came out because of this or that, whatever the case is. Instead of loving these things for their strangeness and their ugliness and their idiosyncrasies. And that really robbed me of a lot of joy in creating. And my friend Justy, who does the Project X Harlow, I went on my first solo tour with them, and they said this phrase to me that really transformed everything for me, that they love to remind me of, and it was called lessons in liquidity, where whatever's happening, just be liquid, just go along with it,
Yes.
and instead of fighting against it, instead of being like, oh, the sound at this venue is not right, it's like, no, the sound at this venue is what the sound at this venue is.
Yeah, exactly.
And
Yeah, that's powerful.
it's like, okay, tonight you're playing off of the world's shittiest $95 Guitar Center PA in the basement. Tonight you're playing at a bar where the sound guy just does not understand how to not blow everything out. Tonight you're playing at a place where the room is so boomy, all they're getting is low end, and it's like, you have the opportunity to create something ephemeral and magical and work with that cannot be replicated in another moment, and instead you want to do a recital. So it's like, okay, let's get away from recital. Of course it's fun to play the things that we've worked on for a long time and for them to go perfectly, but even if they go perfectly, there's going to be some element of unpredictability that actually sends them to the next level, some element of chaos. So I just, again, make the implicit explicit and fully engage with that in my performances and on tour. And whether it's the pain-based performance art, which is very influenced by Christopher Burden, who is probably my biggest performance art influence, where something as wild, him saying something as wild as hey, I'm gonna have you shoot me, and everybody's gonna stand around and watch, and we'll see how it goes. Like we'll see what happens, And what I love about that work of performance art, what I love about Shoot, it's one of his earlier works, and so I don't really exalt it as like, oh, this is the best thing he ever did, because I think that's somewhat insulting to his body of work. But when you listen to him and the people that were there talk about Shoot, it's not, oh my God, this guy got shot, what a spectacle. It's actually, the most stirring thing about this work of art is the reactions from the people that were standing there watching it, because they just watch, and this is, they're all pretty much his classmates in art school, and they just watched him get shot, and they're dealing with rushing him to the hospital and all of this, and seeing his face go gray after the bullet hits him too hard. It was supposed to only graze him, and that's the work of art. It's not, oh, this guy got shot. It's what it stirred in people, because that is something that you can't replicate. Where everyone in that room went in that moment, it's not the same as me reading about it or looking at photos of it. I mean, I can do that and go, wow, what a shocking piece of performance. I will never feel what those people in that room felt. And that was because of the unpredictability, because of the chaos. And in the end, what that meant was surrender. And there's no higher form of surrender than, I'm going to put a gun in your hand and you shoot me. Right. It's like, how much further can you go than that? To just say, I'm surrendering. And so back to, my spiritual beliefs, it's all rooted in surrender and devotion and acceptance of what is, and trying to understand what is, instead of fighting against it because this is not the world that I wanted. Well, this is the world that is, and this is what is happening. So let me work with it and not against it.
Yeah, and I think maybe Bruce Lee said it famously, be like water, my friend. And, I was exposed to noise kind of early on in my life, and it didn't have the impact it did later on. But I became a huge fan of black metal, and I always wanted to have my own band. But like you just said, it is what it is, and sometimes you gotta just make it happen. And having a context of noise where you can bring in any kind of genre, anything you want, and all the flaws, everything makes it perfect. And I think we live in a society where sterility is thought of as perfection, where I think sterile environments are spiritually dead. I don't think it's a living thing. And that just leads me into your performances. I can't go through this interview without mentioning your use of corpse paint and the raw physicality and the minimalism. It feels like commentary. What do the aesthetics mean in your art? Is this a eulogy for something or a birth?
I think it's both at once. I mean, I think every eulogy can also serve as a rebirth, and I think that every birth also can serve as an endpoint to something else. And I think going back to what you were saying about my art being a reflection of the instability of America, I think that led to what you see in the aesthetics of the performance and the aesthetics of my art, where it is this like really frenetic cultural mashup of all of these things, down to the use of the television and the use of VHS tapes, and particularly televangelism. Because, in my live performances, jumping from tape to tape, song to song, you're bombarded with all of these images that go from televangelism to, violent military footage, to religious phenomena, to gay porn, to films about crucifixion, to films about drugs, to, films about, these sort of caught on camera, dangerous accidents, bank robbery tapes. And that, to me, is this sort of collage that got burned into my brain as a child. And then I reflect back out into the world through my art. This sort of, flashing from, one potent image to another potent image to another potent image, and this complete overstimulation, overwhelm, is what I'm reflecting in the aesthetics of my art. So mashing up all of these things, mashing up, wearing corpse paint and playing, all of these various, very overwhelming pieces of VHS footage on the television, jumping from noise to, industrial, to sludge metal, to hip hop, the rants, the spray painting, the bleeding. There's so much happening all at once that it is this very overwhelming, and I would actually argue maximalist experience, which, because that to me is the true reflection of the instability of America and where we're at now, which is this giant, really, chaotic mashup of all things reflected back out. This sort of ugly, mutated baby that we are, and that, we have all grown from being. That's really what Tricky Youth is just the byproduct of everything all at once. And I think that is the bigger reflection of American instability, is this idea of wearing corpse paint, listening to hip hop, playing a Jackson Flying V, and also making noise music.
Yeah, that's very cool, and all very taboo, and all sigil smashing, people seem to find comfort in their little boxes until they're smashed, and then they don't know what to do.
Yeah, and that's often the result of my performances is people don't know what to do. I mean, there's so many times, and I know it can go both ways when people say this to me, and it doesn't always mean one thing, obviously. But so many times people have come up to me when I'm on tour and playing anywhere in the country, and they say, "I've never seen anything like that. I don't even know what that was just now." And it's, sometimes it's the crowd that I'm playing in front of because I might be opening up for an act that maybe is not as, their audience is not expecting something so experimental but so often people will come up to me and say, I don't even know how to describe what I just saw. I don't even know how to describe what that was. That was a lot. And sometimes they mean it backhandedly. Sometimes they're like, that was really something. But other times, people will come up to me and engage with what they've just seen and try to do what I'm talking about, which is, try to understand what they are seeing and engage with it in a meaningful way. I had someone come up to me after a show in San Diego and tell me, "You're an alchemist." And I had never thought of myself in those terms before that moment. But afterwards, I felt it was really the proper way to describe my artistic and spiritual practices. The more I thought about it, that it is alchemy. It is taking all of these elements and transforming them into something different, and transforming them into something new, and maybe something frightening and scary. But for some reason, just like the television with its warm glow, you're drawn to it. You're drawn to what's grotesque. You're drawn to what's disturbing. You're drawn to what's chaotic. You're drawn to what's noisy and imperfect. And you keep getting closer and closer to it until you're standing in front of the TV. And that's essentially a Tricky Youth performance.
Very cool. And yeah, it's interesting to me. If I could, I don't like to put things in boxes, but just to give you a feeling of what I get from your energy, I see you as like a portal, and it's just, whatever reflection of the person, the viewer, I think that's the preconception or misconception I have of you. But also, why do you think that people feel the need to come up to you and classify you, to try to put you in a box when you're being like water?
Well, they want to understand. It's the same as why we create these very personalized projections of, what God is. I'm not saying that it's the same thing that people.
But it's an element. It's definitely an element of God.
But what I'm saying is there's, this sort of fear-based desire to put everything in a box and understand everything in very simple terms.
Right.
Whether that is the grand design of existence or, a weirdo freak noise rock performance artist who's right in front of you. People feel an intense discomfort with not having all the answers. People feel an intense discomfort with not being able to have a very simple explanation for things. So people come up to me after, my performances, and they want a very simple explanation for things. And it's actually funny because I think to loop all the way back around to almost an hour ago when you asked, these people that are saying, send them back, deport them all,
right.
Where is this coming from? Well, a lot of people with really bigoted beliefs, a lot of people who have been conditioned to have these prejudices or these hateful views, a lot of it comes from these fears and insecurities and this need for things to be very simple, to be explained in very simple ways. And you can put them in a box, and there's good guys and bad guys.
Right.
And
we're the good guys.
And the law is good, and these are ethics, and these are morals. And
you're a tax-paying American.
This and America is this, and America is that, because it allows them to stop doing the work. It allows them to it allows them to stop engaging. And the thing that I was talking about earlier, which is, sitting with people and talking with them about how they arrived at this point, that's very, very tedious work.
Yes.
And it's lifelong work. The work of compassion and empathy is lifelong work. That's every day. It's very tedious.
It's a mission.
And it's not something that you get this immediate gratification from.
No.
And in America, we have been taught to really value immediate gratification. We love the television, we love sex, we love drugs, we love, in high volumes, and we love that dopamine, and we want it right now. And we want explanations for things right now. And we want those explanations to be simple. We want to know what God is. We want to know what God's will is. Please tell me what your will is. Tell me right now. Show me what's right and wrong. And, let me do your will. As opposed to, you can find God's will, but it's going to be a search. And it's a search you have to go on. And that's your work. It doesn't get done for you.
Well said, well said. And we are approaching the top of the hour of the Gemini. We said we'd keep it to an hour. Anything in closing? Where can the listeners find you? And also, what's next for the American Degradation hymn series?
Well, I am currently working on an album called A Hum in the Distance Growing Louder Each Day, which is really meant to sort of encapsulate the performances I've been doing over the last, 2.5 years. It incorporates a lot more of the ritualistic elements, a lot more noise elements, samples of VHS tapes that I've used in my performances, and songs that I've been doing on the road during these performances over the last 2.5 years that have not actually been released yet. So I've sort of taken a back seat, or the performance art aspect has sort of taken a back seat rather to focus on the recorded aspect of it. But I am planning on, in ways that I can't disclose right now because they're still in the works, engaging in further and more intense pieces of performance art later in the year once the album is done and the album is released. You can find my music on, whatever the channels of music you listen to. It's pretty much everywhere. It's on YouTube, it's on Spotify, it's on Apple Music. There's, you can reach out to me and order a cassette tape and I'll send it to you and I'll write you a little note. Bandcamp as well. Bandcamp is obviously the best because as an artist, any sort of support from, an audience in terms of finance is very helpful. And so, yeah, I mean, you can find my music anywhere, and the most important thing is, catch me on the road when I'm, in any city or town or weird space near you, because that's really where the Tricky Youth experience to, draw upon Jimi Hendrix one more time sort of thrives and flourishes, and that's where it really happens.
Very fascinating, and thank you very much. Lord, please keep us safe. Promise we will never stray. And
I love the we version.
Yeah, that's for us. That's for all the listeners. And, thank you for listening. And let's hear it for the man, the myth, the legend, Tricky Youth. Thank you very much. Thanks for being here. Everything you said, everything you're doing, it's greatly appreciated. God is willing, God notices, and I promise you will never stray. I can see it right now. You got the rituals, you got everything behind you. Thank you again, Tricky Youth, and thank you to all the listeners out there. God bless you, and good night.
Thank you.